Assalamu alaikum. We are live now. Um, I would like to welcome everybody to our live stream today in our e-learning series. So this is the third episode of the e-learning series that organized by Omani Society for Education Technology, where we spotlight on the best practices of e-learning in higher education during COVID-19. As a society in EdTech, we've been lucky that we had chance to see some of the good examples of e-learning and digital transformation during COVID-19, and we are happy to present these best practices so that it could be like a model for other institutions in Oman or in the region, um, and it will help also those who are still struggling with transforming into online education or e-learning. So today we have with us Mr. Ian from Majan University College. Ian is Associate Dean of Planning and Resources at Majan University College in Sultanate of Oman. Ian oversees the strategic planning and operational priorities of the institution, with IT support, library, marketing directly reporting to him. Majan was the first private college established in the Sultanate, and in 2017 became the first HEI to receive full institutional accreditation from the Oman Academic Accreditation Authority. Prior to joining Majan University College in 2011, Ian worked in IT and e-learning roles at several companies, including the University of Huddersfield and RWE New Power, both in UK. Ian and his team are passionate about using technology in creative and innovative ways to facilitate the best possible learning and teaching experience, as well as ensuring the day-to-day operation of institution efficiently underpin their core educational businesses. And one more thing, that's also I will add to that. I personally, when I see Ian getting into discussion online about e-learning and education technology, personally, I feel that he's a person that has a better picture about the situation. He has more realistic approach to a lot of ways to approach e-learning. I think personally, I think he's one of the best and very valuable assets in education, especially education technology and e-learning in Oman. So I would not take much time. Mike, to you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Faisal. Thank you for your kind words and your a very pleasant introduction. And good evening, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Ramadan Kareem to you all. It's my great pleasure to be with you tonight, talking about digital transformation in higher education, e-learning during COVID-19. Now, I hope and pray that everybody is well during this time, and I'm of course thinking of yourselves and your families and your health and everything. It's a time of stress and anxiety, of course, for all of us, but it's also a really interesting time as well in education, very challenging time, but also a time of great change. So I don't really need to say much about myself because Faisal has done a great job of introducing me. Thank you very much to him there. One thing to add is I've been nearly 10 years at Majan University College in Oman. It will be 10 years in January, so I feel like I know the higher education sector here fairly well. I've thoroughly enjoyed my time here. And also e-learning is my background. It's not something I'm so much on the ground doing these days, but I do have an MSc in multimedia and e-learning. I worked in a university and in corporate world in e-learning in the past. And right now, one of the big things that I'm doing is I co-chair Majan's COVID-19 College Management Task Force. So I'm very much in the thick of it in terms of leading and determining our response to this current situation. Now, I'm not going to spend too long talking about Majan and what we've done. Needless to say, I am proud of what we've achieved. I'm proud that we were able on the first day of lockdown to be delivering teaching online because of the preparation we put in before. And this little infographic here shows a few statistics from 6 weeks into the lockdown of the kind of results that we were getting. I'm particularly happy to see we were getting average attendance in online classes of 70%. Of course, normally face-to-face we'd expect a fair bit more than that, but we're very happy given the challenge that students are going through adapting to all of this, that they have really picked up and taken it seriously and been attending in such high numbers. But I don't want to spend a long time talking about the past because we've all got to where we are today. What really matters is how we take things forward. And so I want to start by, the actual purpose of this presentation here is to just talk through some of the ways I'm thinking about this situation, some of the ways I see things going, and some of the priorities that I think we all need to have as educators during this time. And I think it helps to think deeply about the situation, think about the wider implications of what's going on, and also remember nobody has all of the answers. I certainly don't have all of the answers because this is a very strange time that nobody really knows how we're going to get out of, but we need to navigate our way through it as well as we can. So how do we think about this moment, particularly from a governance point of view? How should we think about it? For example, is it a crisis? Do we think of it with like crisis management lens on? And of course, it is a crisis. Absolutely, it's a crisis. It's one of the biggest ones, if not the biggest one we've ever encountered. But then you think about how you would apply crisis management methodology to this. And you think, well, you'd be looking at a response. You'd be looking at how you recover, what kind of mitigation you can put in place, and how you can be prepared for the future to ensure that you're stronger and you're less vulnerable to that crisis again. Well, how do you apply all of that to a global pandemic? What's your response or what's your recovery? So much of this is out of our control that actually these kind of tools are inadequate really to deal with this. So then you could say, well, is it a change? Maybe we put on our change management hat and we think about it in that way. Well, again, yes, it is a change, and there's so much change happening at such an incredible speed. But if you're going through a more of a formal change management kind of process, of course, you've got a whole planning phase, preparation, you're deciding between different paths, different courses of action, you're consulting with stakeholders, you're going through all of these fixed processes before you actually come to the point of implementing the change. Here we're asked to implement huge amounts of change pretty much overnight. So the rule book goes out the window. So the current tools that we might think of or we might be trained in, the current manuals we might have in our policy repository, they're ultimately inadequate to deal with this situation because this is such an unprecedented global situation. But that doesn't mean that we have nothing to guide us. It doesn't mean that we're kind of completely rudderless in the middle of a storm. But we need to think in depth about this situation and take it very seriously. We also need to think critically about ourselves, about what we're currently doing and what perhaps the inadequacies are that need to be addressed. So how do we go about this sudden digital transformation? That's what I want to address in this presentation tonight. As I said, I don't have all the answers. More my purpose here is to just throw open some ways of thinking and some tools that can maybe help us to think a bit more critically about this situation. So first of all, let's look at this e-learning continuum. Because I said about thinking critically, I think we need to be clear about where we are, what we're doing, and then what's being expected of us. So you've probably seen similar kind of things like this before. This is looking at continuum from pretty much no ICT, no e-learning to something that's almost completely online, completely ICT facilitated. This is a South African researcher, Raturi, who's developed this one. And I'm going to make a couple of controversial statements here. The first one I'm going to say is that I think in the pre-COVID-19 era in Oman, pretty much every single institution in Oman, and I include Majan in this, was predominantly doing face-to-face when it comes to this continuum here. Now, I know a lot of people talk about blended. Blended is something that gets thrown around a lot, and often used to describe something where you're doing face-to-face delivery, but you're uploading your PowerPoints to the VLE. Well, that's not really blended because you have a VLE or because you put the odd forum discussion up there or anything like that. Really, a blended approach is where a significant amount of your curriculum is being delivered online, as well as some of it being delivered face-to-face as well. And I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of institutions in Oman have not been doing that prior to this time. We've been doing face-to-face. And now what's been expected is pretty much overnight, there's been an expectation to make the jump from face-to-face to the far end of the continuum here, which is fully online learning. But there's a bit of a problem with this. The problem with this is it's totally impossible. You can't implement an online learning program overnight. You can't implement an online learning program in a week or in a month or in 2 months. Implementing true online learning programs takes a long time. It takes a lot of expertise, and it's not something you can just do like this. So this is my second controversial statement of this presentation. I don't think any institution in Oman, and again, I include Majan here, I don't think any institution in Oman right now is truly doing online learning. So what are we doing? This is an interesting new phrase that has been coined during this time, and that is emergency remote teaching, or ERT. And I'm going to be using this phrase throughout the presentation. Here's a quote from the article where this was first coined. Emergency remote teaching is a temporary shift of instructional delivery to an alternative delivery mode due to crisis circumstances. It involves the use of fully remote teaching solutions for instruction or education that would otherwise be delivered face-to-face or as blended or hybrid courses, and that will return to that format once a crisis or emergency has abated. The primary objective in these circumstances is not to recreate a robust educational ecosystem, but rather to provide temporary access to instruction and instructional supports in a manner that is quick to set up and is reliably available during an emergency or crisis. So that, I think, is what the majority of us are doing right now. And there's nothing wrong with that. We should be proud of what we're doing because we've had to make a massive change in no time whatsoever. So whatever we're doing now is something very much to be proud of. But look at some of the key words here. It's talking about a temporary shift. It's talking about response to crisis circumstances. It's talking about returning to face-to-face format once the crisis has abated. Now, is this going to be what we see here? What are we actually preparing for right now? If we were preparing for 4 to 6 weeks of lockdown, then emergency remote teaching would be the perfect way to go about it and then go back to normality. But what is going to happen over the summer? What's going to happen in September? This is the most critical question that we all in education need to be asking ourselves right now. And of course, none of us can give an absolute cast iron answer to that because we don't know. We can't tell the future. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but that's where scenario planning, it becomes very helpful. So I'm just going to show here, these are the 3 scenarios, or a summary of the 3 scenarios that I've written for Majan to be looking at here. So these go from least severe scenario to most severe scenario. So the first one is that, and all of this is centered around September. Scenario 1 is least severe. It's basically back to normality, no lockdown, minimal social distancing by September. Scenario 2 is that the lockdown is lifted before September and HEI is permitted to open their campus, but with significant social distancing requirements for the foreseeable future. Scenario 3 is that HEIs are still not permitted to conduct face-to-face in September 2020. That, of course, is the most severe. And me and my colleagues, we were fairly unanimous in deciding that this is where we saw the greatest probability, somewhere between scenario 2 and scenario 3. Scenario 1, we have more or less ruled out of our planning, we think is almost certain to not be the case. But we should also not underplay scenario 2. If you think about social distancing of 2 meters between people, well, that means a lecture hall of 100 people suddenly becomes a lecture hall of 15 to 20 people. So it's a really big problem that is going to significantly change what you're going to be able to do. And actually, it doesn't really matter in one sense which of these scenarios it ends up being, because both of them have a really heavy reliance on online delivery of teaching. Scenario 2, we're not going to be able to do face-to-face classes anywhere close to what we're used to doing, unless through some incredible luck we have 4 times the space and 4 times the teaching staff. But if you think seriously about this, that's what you would need in order to have the same volume of face-to-face teaching if significant social distancing requirements are in place. So both of these require online in a significant way. So this is, and then this is another part of the scenario planning, another dimension of it, is it's not just what we're allowed to do. This comes from a blog on the Wonk HE blog from the UK. It's not just about what we're allowed to do, what the government say you can do. It's also about what you're able to do. For example, if higher education goes back before schools, maybe the childcare issues mean staff and students aren't able to actually come into campus, so it makes it difficult there. But most significantly is what people are willing to do. Are staff willing to go onto campus? Do they think that the risk is too much? Are parents going to let their children, their kids go to the hostels, live in the hostels? So there's all of these other dimensions to the scenario planning that we need to take seriously as well. So how do we prepare for this? Number one, I think, is that we have to work on the assumption that everything will need to be delivered online in September. Now, that might come as a shock to some of you, and that might not be precisely what the outcome is, but I think it's actually really important to work on this assumption. Why do I say that? One reason is it is actually a very likely scenario. But secondly, even if we do have some face-to-face sessions, the capacity reduction, as I've already mentioned, will require their purpose to change in a significant way. Thirdly, we already know how to deliver face-to-face. That's been what all of our institutions have been predominantly doing. Being over-prepared for online teaching is not a problem, but being under-prepared for it is a problem. Fourthly, we don't know what staff and students will be able to do or willing to do, so we need to be ready for that part of the scenario. And finally, there's always a chance of a second lockdown after the initial one has relaxed. So if we're prepared to deliver everything online, we're ready for pretty much anything that happens. But it's not wasted preparation, because actually it's almost certain that we're going to have to use a fair amount of what we prepare. And then the second thing I want to suggest to you is that we need to evaluate what we're currently doing, our current emergency remote teaching. What are the limitations? What are the pain points? How is it difficult for staff? How is it difficult for students? And how do we need to improve it? And finally, we need to adapt our teaching plans to address these limitations and design modules for full online delivery. And of course, it won't just be the teaching programs. It's likely to be technology. It's likely to be infrastructure. It's likely to be student support and many other things as well. So now I just want to talk a bit theoretically. and examine some of the issues that we have with emergency remote teaching. Because if we look at some of the issues, we can then be a bit better at addressing them and improving it. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with Vygotsky's theory of proximal development, the zone of proximal development. And the basic lesson from Vygotsky is that learners can do more with assistance. They can do a certain amount on their own, but they can do more under adult guidance or collaboration with more capable peers. And this is a really key thing when you're thinking of different forms of distance learning, because the assistance from a tutor and the assistance from peers changes drastically. Certainly during emergency remote teaching, it's likely that tutor assistance is significantly reduced, or at the very least, it's likely that the perception of what is on offer is reduced because the format has completely changed. And peer assistance is likely almost eliminated unless you've really thought hard about how you introduce that peer interactivity. So these are some things that we really need to think carefully about as we move forward. Another theory that I think is a very helpful one to think about is that of transactional distance. And this came from the early days of correspondence learning, where it was learning by post effectively. So more basically points to the fact that there's a different type of distance to what you normally think about in distance learning. Of course, there is the geographical, physical distance, but there's also this psychological and communication space. There's another distance that needs to be crossed. This is a space of potential misunderstanding between the inputs of instructor and those of the learner. So this is something that any instructional designer who's used to designing for distance, a kind of distance model, will be familiar with and will design in order to reduce that transactional distance, because this distance happens all the time, in every form of human communication, even face-to-face verbal communication. There's a small transactional distance, but it's very minimal. But when you come to being on other sides of screens, maybe not even seeing faces, maybe not even hearing voices, it becomes very significant. Now, this theory has been taken on by lots of other researchers, and it's been developed and evolved over the time. So, for example, in 2003, Shang developed it into 4 subdimensions, and this makes it more relevant to online teaching delivery. So you have student to teacher, you have student to student, student to content, and student to interface being the platform that the learning is delivered on. And then Anderson in 2003, adapting from Shang, they talk about how deep and meaningful formal learning is supported as long as one of the 3 forms of interaction, and they miss out the interface one here, student teacher, student content, is at a high level. The other 2 may be offered at minimal levels or even eliminated without degrading the educational experience. Now, I think this is a really interesting one to think of in this time, because actually the student teacher subdimension here is the one that we really depend on when we have face-to-face teaching and learning. And if that one is happening fairly well, then the other dimensions, student to student, student to content, you don't need to think quite so deliberately about, because these things kind of happen, particularly student to student, it happens almost as a byproduct of teaching face-to-face. So in normal face-to-face situation, as you can see by this quote here, you have the strong student-to-teacher communication subdimension, and the other ones don't matter so much. But in this case, actually, all of them suffer. So in this case, we need to be careful to consider all of these dimensions, and also the interface one, I think, is important as well. Because they're all a challenge, and we need to be looking at incrementally improving all 4 of these dimensions, making sure that they are addressed. So I'm not going to go through all of these, because I did tell Faisal I would try and keep this to 30 minutes, but I'm very happy to share this presentation with you later. I'm going to skip through the teacher and the student ones here, but student to content, this is one that I think deserves a little more attention. Content for online learning is not simply the PowerPoint used for face-to-face sessions. That might be a helpful resource when you're delivering primarily face-to-face, but that's not a particularly helpful resource when it's the only thing that they're getting or the primary thing they're getting. So how can you adapt this content for self-paced study? You need to think about breaking it up into small bite-sized chunks, using a mix of medium, text, images, video, audio, podcast. Make sure there's a strong integration between content and online activities. Supplement passive content with active exercises, like putting in discussion questions, simple quizzes, polls, things like that. It all helps make the learning more active. And we're, of course, in a time when it's actually very easy to do a lot of that. It's very easy to record yourself on a short video introducing a concept, put it onto your virtual learning environment without any fancy technology or anything like that. This is something that 10 years ago you couldn't have possibly thought about. Then the student to interface. Think about your virtual learning environment, whatever it is, Moodle, Blackboard, Canvas, whatever you might have. Is it mobile friendly? The majority of your students will be accessing it on the mobile. Ideally, it would be nice if they could access the content on their mobile, even on offline. Maybe it can synchronize onto their mobile. Some apps allow that. Is it accessible? How can it adapt for learners that have limited vision or other disabilities? They're going to be really excluded if you're not careful. They have a lot of a big challenge anyway, but during this time when it's 100% online, make sure you don't forget those people. Does your virtual learning environment perform well? Do the pages load fast and reliably? Sometimes performance is a bit of an afterthought if it's just a supplemental resources online. Then try and minimize, make it really easy to get in, make sure authentication is simple, that the students have access to what they should have access to. Try and automate these processes so that it's as trouble-free and friction-free as possible. And then standardize your systems. Try and make sure that they support everything that require. I've got a term I use, which is shadow e-learning. This is it comes from an IT term, which is shadow IT, talking about in the corporate IT world where people do things like installing Dropbox on their computer or using some kind of forwarding all their mails to their personal account so they can use it on their phone more easily and things like that, which of course IT administrators hate, but it happens because the user feels that the things that the company are providing are inadequate. So this happens in e-learning as well, where you have somebody that thinks, oh, I don't like this VLE, I'm going to set up my own Google Classroom, or I'm going to put things on my blog instead, or whatever. And of course, you don't want to shut all that down necessarily, because sometimes these are the really enthusiastic staff. But if you try and make sure that as an institution you're providing the best possible platforms, this really helps to minimize that, because the more places students have to go, the more places they have to have login accounts, the more tricky it is for them to actually get to what they need to get to. And I really like this. There's a number of e-learning models. This is one of my favorites. This is Gilly Salmon's 5-stage model. What I like about this is it very much incorporates the community and the social dimension of the learning experience. I find a lot of e-learning models think of the student as just one individual. And this, you see the different levels building one on top of another. And at each stage, you've got a technical stage of it, part of it, and also an e-moderating or teaching part of it. This is what she talks about it as e-moderating, because it's not simply teaching. Actually, there's a lot that you're doing guiding the learner through the process. So first of all, access and motivation. How do they get onto your platform? Can they log in? Is that possible for them to do? Welcome them, encourage them, suggest that they set up their profile, they put a profile picture on, make it their own, those kind of things. Send them a message, ask them to all reply to the message so they know they can do that. This is online socialization. Have an introductions forum, something where everybody can say a little bit about themselves, have a little task in the first week that's maybe nothing to do with the curriculum but gets them going. And then, of course, it goes into more of the formal learning, the information exchange, knowledge construction and development. But I really like the lower levels here that often get forgotten, but are really critical, especially if you're going fully online. It's easy to forget about these things, and this goes back to Vygotsky and the transactional distance. If you remember these lower stages, you're going to have things set up in a far more effective way and have a better, stronger foundation for the actual teaching that carries on top. And of course, all of this comes under the umbrella of instructional design. And now, instructional design, here's a quite a good definition here. It's a systematic procedure in which educational and training programs are developed and composed, aiming at a substantial improvement of learning. Now, in my experience, I find that universities generally don't think a great deal about instructional design. Particularly universities that are primarily face-to-face, as most of us are. But when we're going to a fully online process, we really need to be very deliberate and intentional about how we design things. That's where the instructional design theory comes in, where we need to be systematic about how we put things together if we want to see that improvement of learning. And see, the problem is that face-to-face, it covers a multitude of sins. You can make mistakes and you can put them right there and then. There can be unintended consequences of the way you do things, and you just kind of keep doing it because you're in that rut. But you can cover over it, you can correct it because you have that one-to-one or that face-to-face dynamic, and it's much easier to deal with. But when you come online, there's a lot of things that things are a lot more raw, and it's harder to put things right. So you have to think about them before you do them a lot more. And I think it's fair to say, and this is nothing against teachers, but a lot of teachers are not instructional designers. You can have teachers that are fantastic in front of a class. They've got bags of charisma. They know their subject inside out. They would go to the ends of the earth to help support their students, and the students absolutely love them and they get great results. But that doesn't convert into being a fantastic instructional designer. These are two different disciplines, and yes, of course, you'll have people where that overlaps a lot, but you'll have a great many where it doesn't as well. But there is still time. There's not a great deal of time, and I don't think we should rest on our laurels here. But there is time to get staff trained, to identify maybe some staff and get them trained up, maybe train the trainer type things so that they can then train more people, and or to get outside help. And I think this is what's going to set apart different institutions in September. There'll be some institutions that go through a normal summer of everybody being on leave and things happening as it normally would happen, maybe a few summer modules or something like that, and then hoping for the best that they might be able to return to face-to-face in September. There'll be other institutions that really pull out all the stops to make sure that the summer is used in the most productive way in order to go through all of their modules, use all of their lecturers as much as possible, because let's face it, most lecturers are not going to be able to leave the country during this time, and hire in outside help if necessary. And of course, we cannot expect to be unrealistic to think that every single one of our modules is going to be a perfectly designed online learning experience by September. But we do have time to make significant progress from where we are now doing an emergency distance learning, emergency remote teaching, even ERT. So now is the time to really get serious about that. Another bit of theory, I can only, because of the size of the screen, show you one level here, but I'm a huge fan of maturity models. I think is a really helpful way of looking at things, e-learning and all kinds of different things. I think maturity models help a lot because they help you to be self-critical. They help you to see where you are on the levels of maturity, and it describes it on different kind of dimensions, and then you can see how can you progress to the next level or the next level, how can you improve yourself. So here's one example. This is Nzamba. The bibliography is at the end. You can look these up if you want. So this is just looking at the very top level. And looking at it, I think probably most institutions are around level 2. If you look at maybe a little bit on level 3, a little bit on level 1, but somewhere around level 2, if you're honest about it. But level 5 would be for components and appearance. This would be interface type things. Developing learning objects, specific resources for this remote learning. They'd be engaging, effortless navigation. Again, this is the interface intuitive. And then it would be individualized and personalized to a very high degree. Electronic mentors, interactive learning materials, learning objects that can match to student needs and interests, use of technology, choices on path, practice and community. There's the community again, socialization and interactivity, a lot there, social presence, collaborative problem solving, critical thinking, and then assessment, multiple assessments for student performance, course improvement, feedback for effective learning, multiple ways of sharing knowledge and learning preference. Now, I'm not suggesting that any of us are probably going to be at level 5 by September. I'm just introducing you here to, if you're not already aware of the existence of these e-learning maturity models, there's a number of them about. This is one that I like, and it's a really helpful way to help build up your maturity and your capacity in your institution. And you may even find that it's helpful to create your own one as well. So just to conclude this, and then I think there'll be a bit of time for Q&A as well. There is still time to prepare a decent online program for September, but we must start now. Again, as I said, it's not going to be perfect world class necessarily, but we can do something that gives our students a really good, positive educational experience. We need to focus on the limitations of the current emergency remote teaching, particularly the teacher to student and the student to student interaction and that transactional distance that you have there. Learning objectives can remain themselves, but the resources may need significant modification to make them easier and more appropriate for online consumption. And I highly recommend looking at things like Gilly Salmon's 6-stage model, 5-stage model, I think it was, and also e-learning maturity models. Of course, although it's unprecedented times in terms of this global pandemic, what we're trying to achieve in terms of moving to a fully online delivery of higher education is not unprecedented. There are many people that have done it before, and so we're not reinventing the wheel here. We can go back and look at models and guides and frameworks that other people have worked on, and they can help guide us forward. Finally, I just want to say good luck to everybody. I know we all need it, and I hope that we all stay in good health, both yourselves and your family, and that September can be a success for all of us. Here is the bibliography, and my contact details are in the bottom if you would like to have a copy of this, or you have any questions you want to take outside of this forum, you're welcome to get in touch. Thank you very much, Faisal. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Ian, for such a very informative session. I hope people had chance to take points. There was a lot of valuable points here. Now the funny thing is here, when you invite somebody like that has same you kind of have same understanding about e-learning and education technology. So since we did not get much question from YouTube, basically I think there are a few students from the college asking few administrative questions. So I'll leave it there. If you, Ian, or somebody from the admin team could see and reply to them, because they're very it's regarding more like a communication issues they have. But so as I was preparing the questions, and funny thing is that you almost covered all these questions, so you left me with nothing, almost nothing. So usually I these questions, I'll get some some people do not cover these different parts, even the communication part, I was really like surprised that you covered that very well, because this is one of the things that when you think about e-learning, you don't really like, you really miss out these issues of communication, different communications that happens, or you miss out a lot of communication in online environment that you need to readjust. So student to student, student to teacher, student to even to the interface, student to the institution itself as well. So there you have multi channels that that need to be readjusted in the online environment. So my question is that I'm talking now. Let's say about the basic communication that happens between student and the college itself. Do you think that in Majan, did you face any problem with the students communication with the college or with the teachers, and if you did, how you managed to to tackle this issue?
Yeah. I mean, as with a lot of these things, it's work in progress. Uh, what we did in the first week of the lockdown, because of course it was a shock to many students, what we did is we actually set up a temporary call centre in one of our large IT labs, so we could all be socially distant. And we engaged about 15 of our support staff with phones, and we basically had them call every single registered undergraduate student. We didn't get, of course, some of them we didn't answer, but I think we spoke to 75 to 80% of all of our students we actually got through to and had a conversation. And they were going through a set list of questions, basically trying to find out how they were finding it. Had they been able to attend any of the online classes? Did they have technology issues? Did they have other issues? And we got some really good data from that. And we intentionally did it by phone. I know some institutions sent out surveys and things like that.
Yeah.
We did it that way for two reasons. One is we wanted the student to hear the human voice and to feel supported. And I think that's something that we really need to remember during this remote time. It's really important to hear the voice and see the face as well where possible too, to have that human connection. So we wanted them to feel like we were reaching out to them and we were doing our best to support them. The second thing was just to try and get credible data, because the member of staff calling them was, if they said something surprising like I have no internet or I have no device, they can question them a bit more, try and help them to come to a solution there rather than just getting a whole load of negative data back. So we managed to, that helped a lot. Students, took a bit of adjusting, but as soon as it got to the point where it's clear that this is not a 4-week period, what else can you do but to accept it? What we're doing now in terms of communication, because you're right to bring this up, it's such a critical thing, and our different student support channels of communication are of course set up for the normal campus-based kind of format. So our student services team have been working really hard. We have academic support people working really hard. We're also trying to consolidate that a bit as well, so that we can have fewer lines, communication lines, so that we can have a call centre of people that pick up the line and direct it. Is it academic? Is it technical? Is it counselling? Is it whatever else it might be? So that's very much work in progress. But because this is not, as we said, something that's a 4 to 6 week lockdown. This is something we're looking at for the foreseeable future. We're reorganising things in order to support in the most productive and effective way.
Thanks. Great. Next question, Ian. Because you mentioned about different scenarios that you're considering as a planning for next, which is great. So should I assume that there would be some sort of investment in this area, investment in term of technology, investment in term of human resource, or investment even in term of training, staff or teachers. So, what is the college plan in terms of investing to be prepared for next?
Yeah, good question. In terms of technology, besides the video conferencing facilities that we now have, um, actually, this is something that's been very much our focus for the past, well, actually since I was recruited in 2011 as director of e-learning. We've been investing a lot of time and money and effort into ensuring that we have a good high performing e-learning platform, and we have staff that know how to use it and use it effectively. We've also made sure that everything, all assessments go on there, get submitted electronically, all learning resources go there. So it's a pretty expansive resource already before we got to this point. When it comes to training and also development of resources, this is something that we're in the midst of planning. This comes back to more or less everything I've said in the presentation, that we really need to absolutely make the best use of the summer period, and that will take investment in staff time, investment in training. We're already talking with somebody in the UK who will be most likely giving some training sessions to us. So really the big investment that I anticipate will be the staff time in actually looking at all of their modules, all of their learning objectives, all of their resources, and making them as online friendly as possible.
So Ian, because it seems like the preparation that you guys doing is not gonna stop just like as if it's gonna stop once COVID-19 is over. It seems like you guys are determined to continue with investing in e-learning more and more to make it as a system, as a part of your education system. So would I assume that in the future there would be let's say like a course within students in a syllabus to teach them about like the necessary skills set for online learning?
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, the whole issue of student induction is a massive one, a really important one that we mustn't overlook, because student induction, of course, everybody's doing face to face up till now, and having big lecture halls full of students and saying hi to them and showing them around and all of that kind of thing. I think student induction in the new semesters, if we're starting online, first of all, it's going to be even more important than normal. But secondly, it's going to be quite difficult to deliver effectively. So we don't have the answers to that yet, only that this is definitely high on our agenda to get right, because it's a challenge that will make or break the success of the semester.
Yeah, that's true. One more, again, another question. So I know that everybody in the college was looking forward to move to the new building. So should I assume that you guys gonna build a virtual, copy of the university if the situation continues?
Yeah, quite frustrating timing, that's for sure. We
Yeah,
had we haven't even had the inauguration of the building yet either. So yeah, although interestingly enough, we have four big spaces there that have been kind of left just on two of the floors. Each side has no partitions up. It's just big open space. And the plan for that was, of course, examinations, events, functions, and also in the future you could put partitions up and build classrooms and offices, whatever you needed.
yeah,
Actually, we're thinking now that might be a suitable class for maybe 20
yeah,
people.
yeah. With the social distancing
Exactly.
measurement.
So it does mean that we have several more social distancing compliant classrooms. So
Yeah,
there is at
yeah,
least that.
yeah. And you know the question now that a lot of students parents ask almost every institutions, um, is there a way to have like a proper online assessment system? Because to be honest, what's happening now is that I mean, if we consider, to be honest, with the GCC countries, they've been putting a lot of efforts into a lot of technologies, a lot of systems that could replace the traditional assessment. And yes, it's not 100% complete, but again, they are very realistic that they are testing out at least. But what happened here that um, some institutions were a bit concerned and they did not approach the online assessment various reasons, you know, because of the technical barriers, the unavailability of any such systems currently, the requirement of purchasing such systems or hardware. So is there any consideration that the college is thinking about to have a proper,
Yeah.
like a proper online system with international standards?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I've got a meeting about that tomorrow. I had a couple of meetings last week about that. It's something we're actively looking at. There's not been any decision made. There's various challenges with something like that, and a lot of these systems are more. The pricing model is more aimed at the kind of professional development certification type market where
Hmm.
it's a kind of price per exam kind of thing, which is complicated when it comes into costing it into higher education, where each student maybe has a variable number of
Yeah,
exams and things
exactly.
like that. So there's some issues there. I think also that there are ways of designing assessment in to make it more reliable even without that technology as well. And I think in some cases, some of our assessments maybe need to be thought through and delivered in a different way. Maybe
Hmm.
one end of term exam broken up into 4 or 5 little, smaller online tests or online activities.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think with any kind of assessment, there's always a kind of spectrum of confidence in terms of how much is this a student's own work,
Hmm.
and the
Yeah.
institution has to ensure that that confidence level is as high as possible. Sometimes you can get that confidence level through technology, like the kind of online proctoring type
Yeah.
systems that we're considering. Sometimes you can get that through the design of the assessment, making sure
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
the questions in the online test are closely aligned to what's been taught in the classes, to make
Yeah.
it very difficult for someone
Yeah.
that's not attended the classes
Yeah.
to do it, having strict time limits, having a big bank of questions so that
Hmm.
every student is seeing a slightly different combination of questions. And so there's a whole variety of methods you can use,
Yeah.
that all of which increase that confidence level. Exactly what we will do is, of course, we are doing assessments at the minute, which
Mhm.
we're doing more of the approach that I just described. But yeah, we're looking also at having a different kind of assessment
Yeah.
system.
So actually, as we were speaking, we have, I think she's one of the student, Shamma Saeed. I hope that I'm, pronouncing her name correctly. So I think this is what a kind of feedback that we also got from other students from other colleges, that when the universities or colleges thought about like thinking about another way of assessing student, um, assignments were one of the methods, but it was overused by some teachers, that they never thought about the time management of a student. So how long that would take for a student to do an assignment. And if we consider like one student has like 5 or 4 courses, then if all what I'm doing is just only giving assignments, then that's also time constraint. There's a time constraint for a student to do these assignments. So I think the this is like a comment from them that they're getting a lot of assignments.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's that absolutely has to be taken into consideration when assignments are being set. We try our best to space them out, but of course, naturally, sometimes it becomes
Yeah.
difficult or things get overlooked.
Yeah. I think if we stay, I will ask a lot of questions, of course, because I think both me and you, we have sort of like similar, I think, vision, and we see things quite similar. So and it's always interesting for me to learn from you, because you actually apply a lot of things that we like we call, or we recommend other institutions to do. That's really interesting. I think one of the point also interesting. This is a point from me. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Majan College is one of the first colleges that they adopted Moodle, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, Star Campus University, they they adapted. They were the first to adapt Moodle, I think, back in not I think, I'm sure, in 2005, because I'm the one that did the project for SKU, so I'm sure about that. So it's really interesting. And also with the assessment, I think what is interesting that you guys are ahead, because there've been a discussion. I was looking like last year, a lot of events you doing, the college been doing about academic integrity, and that should be part of the like assessment system that should be considered for any institution in virtual, or even in a traditional assessment. So I would take last question from one of the participants. Love for humanity. He says, "How do you deal with traditional teachers who are not into technology?"
Yeah, you know what? I have been really impressed at how much our teaching staff have taken it on board and adapted, and people who I would never have believed would be teaching through GoToMeeting, or would never even considered they'd be able to make make a video call or something like that.
Yeah,
And I think it's amazing how much people can actually do when they have no choice. And of course, there's a spectrum there. There's some that are better than others, um, and we have some very responsive e-learning support guys who have been working literally round the clock at times, taking calls and WhatsApps and other things, helping them to helping make sure that things are working well. So I think it's, as with the students, it's support. Like, this is not only difficult professionally, but difficult in terms of psychologically going through this, and concerns, particularly expatriates that have families back in other countries where maybe the situation's worse. So I just think, although we are socially distant at the moment, you have to remember the humanity of
yeah,
each and every person, student and colleague, and ensure that their well-being isn't forgotten.
sure.
So we just have to try and support as best we can, really.
That's true. I think there's no more question. It's just we have few comments from students. As I said, you can
Yeah.
anybody from the college could have a look at these comments. And I believe also we will be inviting Miss Nabila in the future. I believe that she's going to talk more about the quality control at the college, and quality control of e-learning, and the like the digital transformation during COVID-19. So I would really personally thank you, and thank the college for this initiative to come here forward and to speak, um, and to share your experience with everybody in the education community in Oman. um, and I really wish you all the best. One thing that I already mentioned, the college did a good thing, that investing in a good expertise is better than investing in technology, and that's, I believe, you currently have in the college at the moment. So best of luck. I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a real privilege and pleasure to be with you tonight. It's always nice to chat as well. And,
Yeah,
I really admire all that you're doing through the Oman Society for Educational Technology and supporting all the institutions and supporting the country as well during this time. So
so
keep up the great work, and
yeah, yeah.
we'll speak soon.
Inshallah. And I would like to thank all the viewers for taking time to attend on live stream on YouTube. And I would also encourage them to subscribe to the channel, so that, and also enable the notification, that so that they get notified about any future events, courses that we're gonna have that in live stream. And Ian, please, we hope to see you again in another session as well. I think we still need to learn more from you, and hope to see you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to come back anytime.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
and
Majan.
yeah, thank you. That's over now. Bye.
Okay, good
Yeah.
night. Bye.